and also we showed that a small example that we can use this relation so that for nearby supernova, you can ignore all those terms, so I can have this thing. So the nearby supernova observation actually can give you to measure the absolute luminosity or absolute magnitude of the supernova, and then using that one can actually, so that is basically a kind of calibration, and then using that one can actually calibrate any other supernova, and just from that one can constrain the different cosmological parameters. So as I told you earlier, that our main goal first is to measure this omega m naught or omega dark energy naught, whatever be, because they are related. The summation of both those two are one. So knowing one can give the information about the other. And another thing that we have to do is the equation of state of the dark energy, which is the most important thing, because that actually say what kind of dark energy we have, whether it's a constant, whether it's a cosmological constant, or whether it is any exotic. So just to give you a brief idea that from this supernova observation, how one can use this supernova observation just to get this idea about this equation of state. So let's say that okay, I know this DL, so I have this data over there, okay, which actually is distant modulus, which is basically the DL that we say is some logarithmic of the DL. So we have those data. So once I have these data, I know my DL, and from there how I can get the information about the equation of state, which is the most important thing about the dark energy. Right? So let's try to do that. So for the time being, I am assuming, as I said, that the inverse is flat, so the curvature is not there. I am ignoring the radiation because I am now sort of using the more recent or the late time acceleration. So the radiation is far important in the early time. So I can ignore these two terms, and then we can write, you know, that is h square. And if E Z is and these two things are related. The summation of these two things is 1, and whatever is the functional form of WX, I have to put over here and get this EJ. Now, I wrote earlier my GL is basically 1 plus Z integration dz by hz. Okay, so that I wrote earlier. So that is my thing. So this is basically I can put it. So this is my DL expression. And my H is given by this, so I know H naught, EZ is this. So, so if I put on everything, so my DL is basically will be 1 plus Z by H naught. So I am taking in a natural unit where I am assuming this H cot means H cot and equal to P equal to 1. Okay. So now I can differentiate this expression. And if I do it and then rearrange some term, then I can actually write my EZ is actually given by, and this is just simple, you just take the differentiation with respect to Z. So first term will be 1 upon H naught this thing, and the second term will be 1 plus Z this, and differentiation of this will give you just 1 upon E. Fine, and then you just rearrange the term, and then what you get is basically So you get this term. Hence just simple differentiation with respect to Z will give you. Also you can show that if I do this dz of dl, if I do this differentiation, this will give you this term. Okay, so this term is just the inverse of this. Right? So in that sense, I can write my z, which is actually Hz by H naught, is nothing but 1 upon H naught dz So as I said that if I have, let's say, this data, which is this DL, okay. So if I have all this data, so my goal will be now, I know this DL as a red sheet, fine, with all these errors. So I have to actually have some computational technique. From here, I know this DL with the errors and whatever. So statistically, so I have to then from here reconstruct this EJ. So what is the behavior of this? So that is the statistical or that is the computational challenge. That knowing this DL with this error, okay, this is the DL that we have. From there, how one can reconstruct this DL. Now, if you reconstruct this EZ, then obviously I can get the constant on this parameter. Okay. Now, also from this EZ, you know that I have this A double dot by A, which is 4 pi d by 3 rho plus 3p. Okay, so rho is rho total, p is p total. I can put everything over here. A double dot I can write in terms of h. Okay, h derivative. I can use everything. There is a little bit algebra, but that is very simple. All of you can do it. So ultimately, using all those things, I can also write my dark energy equation of state is basically so the idea is that first I have this GL data. From there I have to reconstruct this EZ. Once I have this reconstructed this EZ, then I put over here and then I reconstruct the equation. So that is the technique, or that is the, you can say, that algorithm, that knowing the DL data or knowing the supernova data, how one can reconstruct this equation of state. Okay. Now you can see that there is two things. First, I have a data over here, DL, which is quite noisy, fine. So you see that there are error bars are there, and it's quite a noisy data, fine. So first challenge will be that to get from this noisy data, I have to differentiate this data, fine. So this is involved the derivative of the DL, fine. So I have to differentiate a noisy data. It becomes more noisy, fine. And that is give you a EJ, fine. Then I have to differentiate again this EJ to get this omega x, fine. So it becomes even more noisy. So that is actually the statistical challenge, or using different statistical techniques or tools, so that I can actually, from here, from this noisy data with all those error bars, where there is some big error bar, small error bar, and everything, means computationally I have to reconstruct this W. So that involves what kind of statistical techniques or what kind of tools you use, or your effectiveness of your programming that you are doing. Right? So that is one part. Next part is there, that to get this omega x, I have to know this omega m. Right? So depending upon what kind of omega m naught value you have, then only I can reconstruct this omega x. So I have to get omega x from the supernova data, I have to have some information independently regarding the omega m. If I don't know the omega m naught, then I cannot reconstruct this Wx because it depends upon the omega m naught. So I need to have measure, I need to measure this omega m naught very accurately, okay, because this omega m naught, if you don't have very accurate measurement, it is a very vague measurement, my Wx will also be very vague. So I have to have some other measurement where I can construct, I can get a bound on omega m naught very, very strongly or very, very constant bound that actually can give you this omega x. Otherwise I cannot. So this omega x can be only reconstructed, or I can say, so you can say that this omega x actually, it has some degeneracy involved with omega m naught. So unless and until I know omega m naught very accurately, I cannot get the information about the omega x. So this is not possible. So maybe you have to use the structure formation data or the CNV data or whatever to get a very good knowledge about omega m naught. Then only you can actually use this supernova data to reconstruct the omega x. Right? So that is another thing that you have to keep in mind. So that is when you do dark energy, you have your model, you have to get, okay, what kind of omega x I need to have. Then you have to keep in mind that at some point of time I need omega m naught very accurately so that I can get the equation of the. So this is the basic algorithm, just knowing the supernova, how one can get the information about the dark energy. Right. So now I believe we have some idea about that the dark energy is needed, because we have given that, okay, there is a H problem. So to solve the H problem, we need to have something of equation of state negative, maybe cosmological constant. Also, this supernova data actually gives the hint that, okay, to feed the data, I need to have some dark energy. So they are the other things. So what are the other observational things that actually sort of give the hint that we need a dark energy? So as we know that these CNV observations are there starting from 1992 when Kobe first measured the anisotropy in the CNV. Okay. Then we have this WMAP data starting from 2003. The last data came in 2012 itself, which is the WMAP 9. And then, so this was the WMAP 3 data because it came in 2003. Then there is the 2007 data and there is the 2009 data. So all those things, the WMAP releases are there. And now, this year in March, we have this more accurate measurement of the plan, which came fine. So what they do? So we've already learned that here actually we have this nice oscillatory behavior of the inhomogeneity or the temperature anisotropy in the CMVR temperature, okay, and that gives you this kind of acoustic oscillation. And this is basically the oscillation occurs due to the fact that before the decoupling, these photons and baryons are very strongly interacting to the form of scattering, and this baryon pressure actually gives you, there is a gravity which is there, and then there is a baryon pressure which actually works against this gravity, and then this system actually comes out to be an oscillatory system, right? And that gives you this kind of oscillation. And as the universe expanded and then this photon actually decouples from the baryon and it moves, then there are other phenomena actually comes, and that actually decays all those diffusive term or decaying term actually decays all these oscillations. So now there is a huge, very, very accurate measurement of this temperature anisotropy, and the line that is there, which actually feeds beautifully this CMV oscillation, is a model which is a lambda CDM model, so that it contains a cold dark matter plus a cosmological constant. So it feeds beautifully the CMV anisotropy spectrum. Now, how the dark energy come into play? Means what are the things the dark energy can affect, or from those information dark energy means we can get the information about dark energy. One is this peak location. So as I said that initially also this the peak location can give you a strong constant from the curvature, because ultimately you have a scale in the universe and you measure the angle of the scale, and the angle of the scale will depend upon the geometry of the universe, or the free space of the geometry. From there actually I can, so this you see that this peak location is around a degree scale, right? So this degree around a degree scale peak location actually we say that it actually gives you that the universe space, the space part of the universe is more or less flat. It also gives a very strong constant on dark energy, because ultimately if you have now, even if you have a flat universe, so you have a scale over here and you measure the distance, measure the angle at some point. So this angle will get changed if these things, the distance changes, fine. So if you have a distance over here, or if you take more distance, the angle will change, fine. So the dark energy, if there is the acceleration of the universe, so if you have a distance over there, you measure two pointer over here. If the universe is decelerating, so the expansion is actually in a slower rate, obviously the distance will be something, or universe is accelerating, the distance will be more, fine. So the dark energy, if there is a dark energy, if there is the acceleration of the universe, the distance between 2 points will be much more than the universe is decelerating. And distance much more is the angle will be smaller, fine. So the angle will be smaller means this L, as I said, this is 180 by theta. So angle small means the L is higher, or angle higher means the L is smaller. So if you have a dark energy, more dark energy dominated, this peak will shift this way, or this, if there is a less dark energy or no dark energy, the peak will shift this way. Okay. So that is the thing, and the idea that this actually around a 1 degree gives you a strong constant on this distance, okay, up to the last scattering. And that distance measurement obviously comes that whenever I do a distance measurement, this will come into play, and that actually gives you a constant on the dark energy. Obviously, there will be a degeneracy between both these and these two parameters. Okay. So that is one of the one characteristic of the CMB that can give a constant on the dark energy. The next is the plateau shape. You have this CMB course, right? So you know that what is this plateau means, right? This what you have a CMB triple lecture, right? So just briefly, this plateau is actually, so as I said, this CMB anisotropy is basically due to the fluctuation that you are there in the very early time during the inflation. So if there is an inflaton field, you are learning the inflation. You know that there is an inflaton field that gives rise to the inflation. Also, this inflaton field can fluctuate, okay, and that quantum fluctuation can behave like a seed of the galaxy structure, okay, formation of the galaxy. You are learning this quantum fluctuation or this fluctuation on the inflaton field, right? And you know that this fluctuation of the inflaton field, there is some fluctuation was produced, and then the inflation, which is accelerating, rapidly accelerating universe, stretch this fluctuation out of the horizon, right? Once that thing you have learned, fine. So once it goes outside the horizon, it actually frozen, because outside the horizon there is no causal process that can actually change this fluctuation. Fine. So once they are in the horizon, means they are outside the horizon, they are frozen. Okay. Then when the inflation ends, universe, so during the inflation, the Hubble parameter was a constant, roughly a constant, that you know. So the Hubble horizon is roughly a constant. But after the inflation, again the Hubble parameter starts increasing, and so that's why the Hubble horizon starts increasing. And then what happens is that all those scales which are outside Hubble horizon, then at some point of the time they start coming inside the Hubble horizon. Once they come inside the Hubble horizon, they can get affected by all the sort of processes that can affect this fluctuation, and that's why you get all those oscillations. Fine? Because the pressure kind of thing only can act when you have a causal connection between two processes. If there is no causal connection, all this pressure and all those things cannot work. Fine? So once things are outside the Hubble horizon, they are frozen. So all this flat plateau part is basically, one can show, these are the fluctuation, or these are the anisotropy of fluctuation which are outside the horizon, that have not come inside the horizon till the decay. Okay? That's why you have an anisotropy which is just constant and which just gives you whatever you have created during the inflation, and that the amplitude of this thing is roughly around 10 to the power minus 5 what you have from the inflation. So these fluctuations are basically the super Hubble fluctuation that you have created during the inflation, and that are actually frozen. They are not have any sort of evolution because they are still outside the horizon. They didn't come inside the horizon to get all those oscillating. Now what happens is that, so you have a horizon over here, you have a fluctuation over here which is super horizon, fine, and then you have to evolve this fluctuation and see that how it evolves when the universe behaves like whatever the expansion will be. Now what happens is that, so let's say you have a gravitational potential that has been created due to the matter. Fine. So the matter, what happens when you do the structure formation, the gravitational potential has been created by the matter, and then the baryons falls inside the gravitational potential and they form structure. Fine. Now you have a gravitational potential that is created by the matter. Early time there is no inflation. There is no dark energy. Okay. So there is a gravitational potential. Now the photon falls inside the gravitational potential and they also climb up the gravitational potential. So the energy that they lose during the fall, again they get this energy during the rise. So what happens is basically is that the amount of redshift and amount of blue shift that you have so that the photon falls and photon come out to the gravitational potential is the same. So there is no effect. Fine. But what happens that if universe is dark energy dominated, so the photon when falling, there is no dark energy domination. But when the photon is climbing, there may happen the dark energy starts dominating. So once the dark energy starts dominating, this gravitational potential actually becomes more shallow. So one point, if you have a potential like this, okay, the photon falls over here and it just climbs out. When it falls, it gains energy and then it climbs out, it just loses that energy. But let's say it happens that when it falls, it's fine, and when it climbs out, the universe started dominated by the dark energy. So once it started dominated by dark energy is a repulsive effect, okay? So this gravitational, attractive gravitational potential will decay because this repulsive behavior of the dark energy. So what will happen is basically when it falls, there is a potential depth has been changed. So what the amount you have over here, the energy, when it comes out, so that energy is not there. So there is a effective difference of energy due to this fact. There is an overall anisotropy that you can have over here, and that actually can change this 10 to the power minus 5, whatever the inflation quantum fluctuation is there. Over on top of that, there can be an effect comes from this effect. This is the gravitational potential, decay of the gravitational potential. It's sometimes called the ISW effect. Because this is a detailed calculation, I hope in your CMD this has been done, because for me if I have to do it, it will take some time, but that will not, that will affect my other dark energy stuff. But there can be, so one can actually go through this plateau and see this plateau, and that plateau can, the feature in that plateau can also affect the dark energy, means can have the dark energy contribution. Another dark energy contribution is basically the peak structure. Because if you have a dark energy, obviously because the baryon will get changed, so the total thing should be 1. So if you have a dark energy contribution, the baryon contribution has to be less because everything has to be 1. So that actually also changes the peak structure. So overall, you can have all these 3 combinations from here that can affect the, so the dark energy can affect this part, and this part also. So that is the effect on dark energy on the CMB. I just want to show one thing that previously I told you that the peak location, first peak location actually constant, that the universe is actually flat. This is not exactly, you have to have some other information which is the information of H0. So this is a plot from WMAP 9. So what it has shown, that this is the omega lambda, omega m plane. Omega lambda is the density parameter for cosmological constant, is a matter. This is the line which is flat. And these are the plots, these are the points that actually fit the WMAP perspective. And these are the points for different H0 value. So the black points are for 30 H0 value, means then you have a 40, then you have a 50, 60 and all those things. Fine. Now you can see that the point that actually fits the WMAP data and that is consistent with the flatness is basically for which the H0 value is around 70. Okay. So the flatness of the universe, okay, is not just from the peak angular location, but also you have to know your H0, which has to be around 70. If H0 is not around 70, if H0 is 60 or H0 is 90, universe may not be flat. Okay, means the conclusion may not be that the universe is flat. Fine. We can have some independent measurement of H0 from some other cosmological observation. So together putting all those things actually gives you that the universe is actually flat because you have a H0 is around 70 from Hubble's Space Telescope data. Okay, so that is the CMB part. The other thing is the baryon acoustic oscillations. As we said that all these oscillation was due to the photon and baryon plasma. So if there is acoustic oscillation or the oscillation in the photon field, the same oscillation was there also in the baryon field. Now you look at the structure formation of the power spectrum that obviously has been, I think, taught to you, is around a redshift, say 0.3 or 0.25 or 1 or something. So whatever the oscillatory scale was there around last scattering, which is around 1100 redshift, that has to be properly expanded through the co-moving expansion of the universe to redshift 0.3 or something. So whatever the angular scale you have here, the same angular scale, you have oscillation also in the baryon acoustic oscillation. Only thing is that here whatever scale you have, the scale size here is bigger because the universe by that time has been expanded. This is you measure around 1000 redshift, and this you measure around redshift 0.3, 0.5 or something. And depending upon that, any scale in the universe has been expanded. Right? So same oscillation that you look at the CMB, the same oscillation is there in the baryon acoustic oscillation. Previously, it was not being sort of observed because one can show that this oscillation scale is around 150 megaparsec or 100 megaparsec H inverse, in small h inverse which is around 150 megaparsec. And to get an oscillation scale of 100 megaparsec, you should have a structure means large scale survey at least of that order or more. Fine. So if you have an oscillation which is 100 megaparsec, if you look at this oscillation, your structure should be bigger than 100 megaparsec. So you should have a very, very big survey. So previously those big surveys are not done, but now we have a number of big surveys. And then one determined, this is the SDSS data, all those things have been changed from MAC to this. But okay, so now one can see that around 100 megaparsec you have this beautiful peak that is there, which is also there in the CMB peak. So that beautiful peak is there. Right? So that is the baryon acoustic oscillation measurement, which this peak is there. Because there you are measuring the correlation temperature correlation in the CMB, and you are measuring the correlation function in the power spectrum that we have already done. So these are the baryon acoustic oscillation data. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, these are the baryon acoustic oscillation data. Everything is just messed up. So this is, I think, Wheeler data. This is the Wheeler data. This is the SDSS data, and this is the 2D data. So, and here what we have done is that see these orange lines are the data, the same, because if you have oscillation, you can measure the distance, right? So I measure the distance from the supernova measuring the flux that I received from the supernova. Here I measure distance from the baryon acoustic oscillation, measuring the angle that is sustained by the sun scale, right? So ultimately you measure a distance. So what we have, it has been shown is that these orange lines are the supernova measurement, okay, of the distance, and these black lines are the baryon acoustic oscillation, okay. Now obviously supernova measurements are now huge, 580 as I said, baryon acoustic oscillation measurements are only 5 or 6. But you see the error bar that is there. Look at the error bar that is there for the supernova measurement of distance, and look at the error bar that is there in the baryon acoustic oscillation. Because in the baryon acoustic oscillation measurement is the measurement of this large scale structure, the systematics are very, very controlled. So obviously now supernova data are better because you can do a much more good statistics because the number of data are high. Here we have only number of 6, 7 data. But once we have a baryon acoustic oscillation data through all these redshifts and much more data, the baryon acoustic oscillation will be a really, really good data to distinguish different dark energy models because you see the error bars are very, very small considered to the supernova. Okay. So just to see that what kind of universe now we have. So this is after Planck. Okay. So this is the result, the Planck and the WMAP polarization data, the Planck and baryon acoustic oscillation, Planck and supernova also. Okay, I forgot to do the supernova something. But these are things. So what you get that W roughly have a base speed around minus 1.2, minus 1.1 or something. Okay, with an error bar, roughly 10% error bar. And these are the measurement of omega lambda and omega. I will come to the point what is meant by minus 1.2 because cosmological constant is minus 1. What is things that will go to minus, less than minus 1. Okay. So that point I will come. But these are the current information. In the very beginning I told that two things I have to measure. One is the W and the omega lambda or omega, whatever. So these are the measurements. So W is basically this kind of values of W we have now. And this is the measurement of omega m or omega lambda that we have. So this is the current exactly the status after the Planck measurement. Okay. So this is now what we have is basic content. So before Planck, the dark energy was around 72%, dark matter around 22%, and the ordinary matter, whatever the stars, galaxy, hot gases, and everything, around 4.5. After Planck, actually Planck has said the dark energy may be a little bit less than the previously one expected. So from 72 it came to 68.3, and the dark matter will actually become 72. So this is all because the Planck data is now more small error bars, so you can measure the things much more accurately. So this is what the Planck actually said. Okay. So let's just combine. So one can see that this is before Planck with the WMAP data. So this is the supernova measurement only. Okay. This is the supernova measurement. This is the measurement that come from the WMAP, and this is the measurement that come from the baryon acoustic oscillation. Fine. Now you see there is a very important thing. As I said, the supernova measure the luminosity distance, right? The flux measure. Right? Both CMB and baryon acoustic oscillation actually measure some scale and the angle that it sucks in the scale. From there it measures the distance. And you see that they are actually orthogonal. So that's why they are very effective measurement, because this, you see that both the CMB and the baryon acoustic oscillation has the slope the same direction. Where? Because as they measure the angular diameter distance or the measure the angle that the any scale substance in the universe. Where the supernova data measure the luminosity distance and it has a completely opposite shape. And that's why these are very important measurements to combine to get a very, very strong constant. Right? So that was very important, that supernova and whether Planck or WMAP or the CMB and baryon acoustic oscillation, you can combine to get a very, very strong constant which is around this figure. Okay. So this is pre-WMAP, pre-Planck. So this is the cosmological constant. One can see the cosmological constant is very much allowed. It is within all the regions. Fine. You have this the idea of the 68% and 95% confidence level of those things. More or less everybody agrees, right? That what these contours mean. The inside one is called the 1 sigma deviation of the 68%, and the outside is the 95%. It's basically it's a base fit measurement or whatever you call the average. And then you have a 1 standard deviation or the 2 standard deviation. So that actually. And this is basically if your dark energy is not a constant. So here it has been assumed that the W is a constant. This W is a constant parameter. It's not cosmological constant, but it's a constant parameter. But let's say the W is not a constant parameter. So this is the universal parameterization for all the experiment that people take, which is called this CPL. There are 3 persons, Caldwell, Polanski and Linder. So this is a sort of a parameterization that we will take, which has a 2 parameter. One is W naught and another is W A. Okay. And then if you just look at this W A, W naught plane, then you get this kind of result over here. And one can see that W A equal to 0 and W naught equal to -1, which is the cosmological constant, which is right inside of the all confidence one. So W, the cosmological constant, is very much a allowed model for every of them. Now this is from the Planck. So this is before Planck, WMAP 9. Okay, and you see that here. So this is only CMB, and the dark point is that with CMB, baryon, Hubble parameter measurement, and the supernova. And one can see the cosmological constant is just outside the 1 sigma quantity. And this is the Planck measurement, okay? And this is the only Planck. This is the Planck plus some set of supernova data, and this is the Planck plus some other set of supernova data. And here also one can see the cosmological constant, which is W equal to -1 and W equal to 0, which is also just outside the 1 sigma quantity. I will come to this point at the end of the last lecture, more detail about this thing. Okay? So what we have from this thing, that dark energy is there, W naught is never 0 from all these contours. W0 is not a 0 thing that is allowed. What is allowed is at least it has a negative equation of state. So dark energy is there. Cosmological constant is more or less sort of allowed, just at the boundary of the 1 sigma. Another important factor is that the allowed region of W naught, okay, this is a huge portion is there, which is the less than -1. Okay. So this is a very, very important thing. I will come to this point later, which is called the phantom region. And the phantom region is something which is very hard to explain in take a standard field theory approach. Right? But it seems the data is actually giving hint that there is a phantom region, there is a region which is one has to take seriously. Okay. And one should now change your model building to allow or to incorporate the phantom region. Okay. So this is the latest observational data for W or for dark energy is by this figure. Okay. So you should keep this figure in mind, that the cosmological constant is allowed around just less than 1 sigma, and there is a huge portion which is actually phantom, right? And that one has to take care. So now the question is, what kind of dark energy now we have? Right? As I said, that the cosmological constant is allowed, and so a very long time ago, and we know maybe that Einstein himself introduced the cosmological constant because it gives you a repulsive gravitational effect, and the repulsive gravitational effect, the idea of Einstein was that the universe is expanding, okay? But if I put some repulsive gravitational effect, we can actually halt this expansion and make the universe get expand. So that was the idea of Einstein. But later on, De Sitter and other people have shown that actually when you put the cosmological constant, the static universe that you see, that they get the solution, which is a very unstable solution. If you just perturb a little the solution, the universe will actually start accelerating. Right? So the static universe is not a solution with the cosmological constant. Actually, with the cosmological constant, universe expands. Not only that, the universe expands exponentially. Right? So that was a sort of a problem, the way the Einstein introduced the cosmological constant, but the cosmological constant is very much same. And in fact, later on, Jelzovic showed that if you have a ground state, the vacuum state of any quantum field theory, then the vacuum state can be a Lorentz invariant form of the vacuum state can be written in terms of this way. Okay? So that energy momentum tensor should be Lorentz invariant, and then if you have a vacuum state or a ground state of any field theory, then that can have an energy momentum tensor of this kind. Okay? And if you have this kind of energy momentum structure, then it is very simple to show that the pressure which comes from the space part and the energy density which comes from the time part actually related with this thing, which is actually cosmological constant. So now the problem is that that if it is such a simple thing, what the problem with the cosmological constant, and then how to motivate things or motivate dark energy models which are beyond the cosmological constant. So let's just see that what if you have a cosmological constant, which is a very simple thing, and as you just saw that it is allowed by all the observations mostly. Okay. So why we go for all those complicated dark energy? Why not we take the simple cosmological constant for our case? Okay, so you know that ultimately what we got is there is omega lambda is roughly 0.75. So that we got from all the observations is roughly 70% of the universe. Omega lambda naught or and this is nothing but rho lambda by the rho c naught. Right? That I told earlier. And rho c naught I told you that this is the energy density. Okay. So this is of the order of, if I just put all the values in the natural unit, so this is roughly around 10 to the power minus 47. So what I get is that in order to have this dark energy, which actually gives you the acceleration, which value is around 0.7 the density parameter. So from there, rho c naught is this. So rho lambda naught is rho lambda whatever is also roughly of the order of that, means maybe one order less or one order, roughly that order. Right? So this is the energy density. So you have energy and density. So that's why you have your GeV to the power 4. Fine. So the energy scale is roughly right. The energy scale that is involved is roughly 10 to the power 3 electrons. Or plus minus, I mean like 10 to the power minus 4 minus 3 something. So you have, so the energy density of the order of this and the energy scale is involved is roughly 10 to the power minus 4. Now what is this problem of this kind of energy scale or this energy density? As I said, this kind of energy momentum tensor structure, as Jelzovic showed, that this can be naturally one can get from a ground state energy for any field theory. So let's just calculate the ground state energy of a standard field theory. Right? So let's say I have a scalar field. Okay. Just non-relativistic calculation. No general relativity calculation, standard special relativity calculation. Right? this is the thing, and the equation, I mean the equation of motion is so I can get this solution, which I can write in a plane wave solution in the basis of all these Fourier modes. So this solution will be, this is standard field theory. This I would believe everybody knows, fine. So you can write it that this A and A dagger is the creation and the annihilation of it, fine. The standard solution, but the solution, when you do this solution, this K naught, so this has a mass shell condition, okay, that you also have, and this K naught is K, which is, so this mass shell condition is, on this mass shell condition you get this solution. So if you have this solution, so this is phi, okay. I can put back there, I can calculate this L, I can calculate phi dot, I can calculate the momentum, and I can subsequently calculate the Hamiltonian of this system. So if you calculate the Hamiltonian of this system, so this comes out to be dk by 2 हाँ हाँ 3 by 2 fine. In 5x what you are saying? 2 by हाँ, this is sorry. So this will be under root that thing, right? So this is total. Sorry. Okay. So now usually in the standard field theory, what we do is that we said that my ground state energy is in standard field theory or whatever you do the standard quantum mechanics, the potential of the ground state energy doesn't matter. What it matters is how it changes in the derivative matters, or the potential difference or the energy difference between the two points are matter, because we never measure the energy, but we never measure the energy difference. So what we do is basically we normal order this system. After normal ordering, we said that okay, whatever we have A dagger A or A dagger, I will just change it to A dagger. Right? That's the way I do it. Fine. To the normal ordering, I put the ground state energy to the zero. Fine. That is the standard normal ordering process that we do for the field theory, because we never measure the actual energy, we always measure the energy difference. In gravity, I cannot do it because you know from the Einstein's equation. In the Einstein's equation, whatever energy is there, even if they are, when you write down the potential, derivative of the potential is there, but in the Einstein's equation, the potential is inbuilt there, right? So whatever energy is there, that is always contributes in the Einstein's equation itself. So I cannot normal order it, fine. So that's the point, that in the standard gravity, when you do the gravity, I cannot normal order to put the ground state energy to 0, because the ground state energy, whatever energy is there, that always curves the space-time to the Einstein's equation. So I can use the commutator relation between A and dagger and write down these things, okay? And if you do it, it's roughly proportional. So I'm just not writing all the constant terms. So this will be dqk ek A dagger A plus some half. So if I use the A dagger computation, which is del cube k prime, so you get this kind of thing. So now this is Hamiltonian. So the ground state energy will be this thing. When I do this thing, this part will obviously 0, because the annihilation operator putting over 0 will give you 0. So the thing that contribute will be this, right? And that value will be this one, right? Means I have to integrate this, and remember, I have to integrate even all the k's that I have, right? From k0 to k infinity. So that integral is basically nothing but dk 4 pi k square ek is basically nothing but k square plus m square, and I have to integrate this to the infinity. And for all the k I have to integrate. Right? So if I do all the k integrated, obviously this integration will be dominated by the larger k value. So there will be ultraviolet divergence as goes as k to the power 4. Right? So this will diverge as k to the power 4. But if I say that okay, my theory, because I am doing a general relativity and then I am using a quantum kind of field theory. So let's assume that I know my general relativity till only my Planck scale. Okay, then I can cut off this thing not up to k infinity but up to k max. Fine. Then this will be some k max to the power 4, and if I put the Planck scale energy, this will be around 10 to the power, so which is 10 to the power 19 GeV. So this will be 10 to the power 76 GeV to the power 4, and here I need 10 to the power minus 47 GeV to the power 4. So the difference is roughly of the order of 10 to the power minus 120. So the ground state energy is actually of the order of 10 to the power 76 GeV to the power 4. Observationally, I need 10 to the power minus 47 GeV to the power 4. So the difference is roughly of the order of 10 to the power 10 to the power minus 120. So that is sometimes called the fine tuning problem. So that how I can fine tune the cosmological constant to such a low value where actually it is a ground state energy of any field theory. So it is of the order of this. I can cut off it to not k Planck, I can cut off it to k Guth, or I can cut off it to k say electroweak or QCD or whatever. Still you will see that the order of value, the difference order is huge, which one cannot find. It is not maybe 10 to the power minus 120, but it is also obviously very huge. Right? So that is the fine tuning problem that we have. That is, we have if we have a cosmological constant. Now, as I should say that this is not a cosmological problem with cosmological constant. This is a problem with any dark energy, because for any dark energy, the energy involved is 10 to the power minus 47 GeV to the power 4, whether it is a cosmological constant or whether it is a dark energy, any dark energy. And there is no way till now it's known that how one can get an energy scale of 10 to the power minus 47 GeV to the power 4 for any dark energy, whether it's a cosmological constant or whether it's any other dark energy. So that problem, this fine tuning problem is there, which till now is very difficult to solve unless you solve it anthropically, so that you said that the cosmological constant or the dark energy can take any value at different part of the universe. Maybe in our universe we take a small value so that we survive. Fine. Okay, so this is the problem what is called the fine tuning problem. The other problem, which is not that dangerous but still quite strong problem, which is this cosmic coincidence problem. So this problem is sometimes one can say that, as I said, this dark energy, when this is 0.7 and omega m naught, which is 0.3, which is rho m naught by rho c naught. Fine. So what we get that both rho lambda and rho m are of the order of same order around the present. Okay, one is 0.3, one is 0.7, so they are the same order. Right? Now if you look at how they evolve, the matter density evolves as 1 upon aq, so it just falls like some sort of a time dependence. Whereas the cosmological constants are just constants. So if you have this monotonic behavior from the mass energy or the rho m, and this is constant, they can only cut at one point. And it happens to be that this one point is around the present time. So the cosmic coincidence is that why this today is so important, that these two completely defined behavior or time evolution of two energy density, they matches only around the present time, not earlier or not later or something. Right? If it could have been here, it could have been here, fine. Then if it could have been here, dark energy would have dominated long time ago, and there would have been no structure that would have been formed. It could have been here, so then we could not, so there till now there is a desiccant universe, so we cannot explain the supernova or whatever other observation. So the very fact that this is happening over here, it's some sort of a puzzle that says that people say it's a kind of a cosmic coincidence problem, that what these two things just coincidence around the present time, why not any other sort of history in the universe. Right? One can just do it in a little bit defined way. So let's say I just write for a cosmological constant is omega lambda, which I wrote over here, which is rho lambda by rho t. Rho C naught is basically the total energy density, and this can be written like this way: n is the what you can call this E folding, or is the logarithmic of A by n. So this is actually one can write like this way. Okay. This is the simple thing. Now assume that this omega lambda naught today is around 0.73, and we call a transition when omega lambda was 0.05 to omega lambda is 0.95. So you have a omega cosmological constant which is kind of negligible, very early time, and it is roughly dominate the whole universe, which is 0.95. If you put, giving the fact that today the value is around this, if you do this thing, you will see the number of refolding that change to get from this value to this value is just around order 2, or if you put in the expansion scale, in the E-folding scale, the universe has expanded only a factor by 7. Okay. So the whole change of omega lambda only occurs around the present epoch. Okay. It is only E-folding of the order of 2 from the present epoch. Right? If you just compare it to how the universe has expanded since the decoupling, the CMB decoupling, it is roughly of the order of 1100. Right? So this whole history of the universe, the omega lambda changes from nothing to almost everything only around sharply around the present time of the universe. So why? So that you can call it a cosmic coincidence problem. So like if you draw a graph like that, so if I plot d omega lambda dn, and this is my n equal to just 0 around the present time, so it seems that it just like this kind of. So the full thing actually changes. It only has a sharp peak around the present time. Other than that, every time over there in the universe, the omega lambda is just, there is no change or no evolution of the omega lambda. So that sometimes you call it a cosmic coincidence problem, that why this present time is so special that all these changes only happens around the present epoch. Okay. Because the universe has expanded, if you know from CMB, so universe has expanded around the 1000 order of magnitude the expansion factor. So this is called the cosmic coincidence problem. So these are the two problems that we have in a standard cosmological model. As I said, the fine-tuning problem is there for all dark energy models, but this cosmic coincidence problem is simply just a problem for the cosmological constant, because that actually can happen only if this rho lambda is a constant. If the rho lambda is not a constant, then you can have some different kind of behavior. So that is the main motivation, that people look for something different from a cosmological constant just to address this cosmic coincidence issue, or whether one can address this cosmic coincidence issue. So how one can address this cosmic coincidence issue? There are several ways one can address. The first one, you can say that, let's say I build or I try to model a dark energy where whatever be your initial condition, whatever be initially the universe behaves, or the status of the dark energy or whatever, at some point of the time the dark energy always catches up with the matter and it starts dominating. So if I want to build a model, then it doesn't depend upon the initial condition. Whatever be the initial condition, ultimately the dark energy will catch up the matter and it will accelerate the universe. So this is one sort of thing that people can build. Okay, I will show that how that kind of thing can happen. Right? So these are sometimes called the tracker model. So the model is there that you don't have to fine tune your initial condition to get some value of dark energy or some behavior of dark energy. At present, whatever be your initial condition, somehow your system or your evolution equation is such that around late time the dark energy will always dominate, and once it starts dominating, it will actually accelerate the evolution. So this is one model which is sometimes called the tracker model. And what happens is that here the dark energy is actually a constant as a cosmological constant, it actually evolves. So as it evolves, then means this problem of having just two means having a two particular kind of time evolution, it gets a little bit softened, and one can show that one can get in this cosmological constant cosmic coincidence problem solved by showing that okay, if you don't have a coincidence, it actually will happen. You don't have to fine tune your initial condition, whatever, it will naturally happen in your system. The second is sometimes you can get that there is no coincidence itself. The dark energy and dark matter or whatever matter, they are always there, they behave like a similar way. Only difference between them is that one actually clusters and one does not cluster. You need to have some matter or something in the universe which clusters to give you the structure formation of the universe. But here in this model, sometimes these are called the scaling model. So the dark energy always scales. Okay, so dark energy always sort of behaves similar way as a matter, but only difference is that you somehow have some field theory where the matter clusters, the dark energy does not cluster. And in the structure formation, you learn the sound speed of the fluctuation is c square, right? And for matter, the c square is 0. Okay, that maybe you have learned, right? And that c square is actually 0, gives you the things to cluster, right? So one can show that if you have a c square, because this c square actually defines what is called the Jeans length, and the Jeans length actually defines that whether it's a greater than Jeans length the fluctuation or the smaller than Jeans length the fluctuation, depending upon that, thing will grow, the structure formation will grow or it will get suppressed. For dark energy, one can have a c square which is 1, so it never clusters, but matter c square is 0, so it will cluster, but they behave like a similar way always. So it's sometimes called the scaling solution because dark energy always scales the matter. Okay. So this is another model. Then another model which is called the Theyer model. The idea is Theyer model is similar idea that you already know in the inflation. So in inflation you know that I can have a potential, a scalar field with a potential, and if the potential is flat enough, it can behave like a cosmological constant. Right? And once it behaves like a cosmological constant because it is potential dominated, then it can actually behave like a dark energy. In the Theyer model what happens is that you have a something like the inflation potential rather than you can have a something called this chaotic model. You have already learned the chaotic model of inflation. Right? So similar kind of chaotic model of inflation where the potential is m square phi square or m square phi to the power n, that kind of potential you have, what happens is that this m is very, very small. So you have already learned the two Slodel conditions, right? In the inflation. You have learned the two Slodel conditions. One is epsilon, which is b prime square by b square, and another is beta, which is b double prime by b. Right? And to have the inflation, these two parameters has to be smaller than 1. Once these two parameters means greater than 1, the inflation ends. Right? Now this b double prime is basically gives you the mass square of the field. Right? The b double prime. For a field, the b double prime will give you the mass. Right? The curvature of the field. And if you have this dark energy, so you have this 3h square is some rho n plus rho phi. Fine. This rho phi is, you know, pi dot square plus v. Fine. If you have a Slodel condition, I can ignore this term. So it is just v. And these are of the order of same order. So your v is actually of the order of h square. Fine. Okay. So if you put over here, so this eta is roughly m square by h square. Okay. So now if I have in the early times, if I have a model where this m phi is very small, in the early time h is huge, so your m square is very, very less than h square, so your eta is small, so your Slodel condition is satisfied. So initially the dark energy is just frozen, it doesn't evolve because due to this Slodel condition satisfied. And if the Slodel condition is satisfied, you know that my rho phi is half pi dot square plus v, p phi is half pi dot square minus v. Slodel, you can ignore this term, so your p phi by rho phi is of the order of -1. fine, because both are zero. So initially the dark energy is actually just frozen to W equal to minus 1 value. Okay, so it just behaves like a cosmological constant, fine. But as the inverse evolves, the H started decreasing. At some point of the time, this H will be, in this term will no longer satisfy, this eta is no longer smaller than 1, in eta can be greater than 1. So if once the eta is greater than 1, the scalar field starts evolving. Because it is no longer frozen, it starts evolving. Fine. Once it starts evolving, the Ws is actually starts increasing from minus 1. So it is, so you can have a Ws which is frozen to minus 1, and then at some point it just starts increasing. Okay. So these are called the Thoyak type of model. So you can actually model the parameter in such a way that till today or very close to today, this W remains close to minus 1 always. I will show that model. Okay. The W remains very close to minus 1, so it remains as a behaves like a cosmological constant, no problem. Fine. And another thing here is that this model has an inbuilt thing that the Ws actually increases in future. So it can actually increase and go to 0 also. So once it goes to 0 or hit 0, or it, previously I also showed that Wx has a condition to get the inflation or to get the acceleration. Okay, there is a bound on Wx. But if it increases and then just violate that bound, then the universe is no longer accelerating. So in this kind of model, you can have a model where universe is accelerating today, but in future universe starts again decelerating, and these are sometimes called the transient acceleration. Okay. So the universe may be accelerating today, but in the future maybe the universe again started decelerating. So these are called the Thoyak kind of model. Only problem here is that, as I said, that here we will show that it doesn't depend upon the initial condition, but here the initial condition is very important. You have to really fine tune your initial condition to get everything right. Okay, but most probably I don't have the time. In some string theory setup, one can actually show that with some sort of setup, you can get those initial conditions in a right places. Okay, whether you believe in string theory or not, that is different issue, but they are sort of a kind of exotic construction where you can get that kind of setup. But at least we can have a tracker model and we can have a Thoyak model which are there. Okay. So let's just look at now this tracker model. As I said, it doesn't depend upon the initial condition and how those things can be done. How long is that class? 3:30. Okay, so I just do the tracker model today, the other thing I will do. Okay, so you know that my rho phi is half, if you have a scalar field which is given by phi. So in a homogeneous isotropic universe, your rho phi will be this. Your P phi, rho phi will be this, your P phi will be this, right? So let's assume that you have a potential which is k by phi to the power alpha, and alpha is greater than 0. Okay. And in the early time, obviously we know that in the early time the matter is dominating, the dark energy is not dominated. So the universe evolution is in the early time given only by the matter. Dark energy is there, but as because rho b, the background matter, whatever, it's a matter or radiation or whatever, it is greater than rho phi. So the background evolution is governed by this rho b. Okay? Because the dark energy is subdominant in the unknown. It is there, but it is subdominant. The background evolution is governed by this rho b. Okay. So I can have this scale factor t to the power some p or alpha, let's say t to the power p or t to the power q, where it depends upon whether you have a matter or you have a radiation, the Q will be whether it is 2/3 or half or whatever. So now I have my scalar field equation phi double dot plus 3h phi dot plus v prime phi equal to 0. And as I said, this rho phi doesn't contribute to the background evolution. The background evolution is given by only background, which is given by this. I put it over here, so I get, if I just calculate the h from here, so I get over here dq by d phi dot, and v is given by that, so this will be minus alpha k by phi to the 1 plus alpha. Okay, so I just put this h coming from here and I just put it over. So one can just solve it. Okay, you get a polynomial, a power law form. So your phi, you can see, will be proportional to some p to the power p, where your p is 2 by 2 plus alpha. You just put it over here, you will see that for p equal to 2 by 2 plus alpha, this equation is satisfied. So if it is there, now I can know my phi is this. So I can calculate my phi dot, I can put over here. My v is this, I can put this v over here, and I can calculate rho phi, and it's time dependent. So my rho phi will be proportional to p to the power 2p minus 2. Okay. Now, in your background universe, how your rho b actually, how the time dependence is rho b, of rho b, even if it's matter or radiation? Whether it's a matter or radiation, how the background energy density evolves with time. What is the roughly time evolution? 1 by
t square.
Yes. So this is t to the power minus 5. Always, whether it's a matter or radiation, the background evolution goes as 1 upon t square. Your rho phi goes as this. Fine. And if your p is positive, fine. So rho phi actually evolves or it falls slower than t to the power minus 2. If your alpha is positive, your p is positive, so there is a positive term. So the rho phi actually falls slower than t to the power minus 2. That you convince? This falls as t to the power minus 2. Rho phi will always fall slower than t to the power minus 2 because there is a positive term over here. Fine. So whatever be your rho phi initially, fine, doesn't depend what is its value. Ultimately, the rho phi will always dominate over the rho background. Fine. Is it clear? Is whatever be the value, you don't have to find it. Fine. At some point of the time, the rho phi will ultimately dominate over the rho value or rho background. And when it starts dominating, as because this is a scalar field, and it can give like a dark energy kind of field. Okay. So here, so what we get over here is that your rho phi by rho b, which is proportional to e to the power 4 by 2 plus alpha, and then it always, it is basically an increasing function of time. So at some point of the time, rho phi will always dominate over the rho background. Right? I can also, I just put everything over here. I can divide p phi by rho phi to get a omega phi, and I can also calculate what is my omega phi. And if you do that, it's just a simple calculation. You will find that it will come out to be okay. So there is another important thing you can see. Whatever value, so omega b is basically the background equation of state of the background matter. Whether it is radiation, it is 0. It is 1/3. It is a matter, it is 0. Now you can see whatever value is alpha over here is there. Once this omega value in this background is matter, this becomes automatically negative. Right? So whatever is the equation of state in the early time, once inverse starts behaving like a matter, W will be 0, so it becomes automatically negative. So what you have 2 points? One is that this rho phi will automatically start dominating, and in omega phi, once the matter dominate starts, omega phi will automatically become negative, so that it starts behaving like a dark energy. It does, you don't have to actually, there is no fine tuning is there, no initial condition problem is there. It's just that the potential is such that it actually has that behavior. Okay. So these, as I said, this kind of a tracker model. So whatever is the initial condition, you don't have to fine tune the initial condition, but it is inbuilt in your model, this kind of model, that the rho phi, whatever value is in the early times, it will ultimately dominate the universe. And not only that, the equation of state, once it started matter, once the universe becomes a matter dominated, the equation of state is also becomes a negative equation of state, and then you can give it as a dark energy. Only thing is that, as I said, that you have to have a sort of a potential which is of this kind of form. So you have to now look for what kind of theory can give you this kind of potential. So here you may not have to fine tune the initial condition, but you have to fine tune the form of the potential. So the potential form is something 1 upon phi to the power alpha, alpha positive. Right? It's not that phi square potential will be that kind of thing. Okay. So here you have to fine tune the form of the potential, but not fine tune the initial condition. Okay. And this is basically sort of a tracker model that you have. Do you have 5 minutes or 2 minutes? No. Okay, fine. So I just stop. So, okay, from tomorrow I just. Huh? Oh, some people are saying no, some people are saying 10 minutes. You decide. Can I continue at least for 5 minutes? It's just a small thing. Just small thing. And then I will. So there is another potential which is interesting actually. Is just an exponential potential. Let's say I have an exponential potential. So I have a just simple exponential potential. So if you put the exponential potential, you just put over here the exponential potential, it will be very easy to solve. In fact, exponential potential, maybe in the equation also you learn, exponential potential is the only potential which actually can solve this equation of motion analytically. You can just solve it analytically. And if you do the exponential potential, you can show that means I can just write it. You can show that rho phi by rho b, which is basically the total thing, is basically 3 into 1 plus this thing divided by lambda. That also you can just put it over here. You can get that. So it is nothing. If you just basically you can get an exponential potential for alpha density. So that kind of thing. So this is your omega phi, because it is rho phi by the total rho, which is the rho critical. So this is your omega phi. So what we have here, your omega phi is always a constant. So you have a constant part of the scalar field that is there in the scalar field. A constant energy. Right? The ratio between that thing is just a constant.
Sir, lambda is there alpha.
Oh, there is a lambda. Now what is the problem? The problem is that in the nucleosynthesis era, so here if this is dominating, it will always dominate because the ratio is always a constant. If it is subdominant, it is always subdominant. Right? Because this ratio is a constant. This omega phi is always a constant. Right? It is not evolving with time. So if your rho phi is subdominant here, it will always remain subdominant. If it is a dominant, it will always remain dominant. Right? So there is no way that you can have that something was subdominant previously and then started dominating. That's what happens over here. Right? So it actually always scales. So the ratio of the rho phi and rho b is always scaled at the same way. Right? It always does scale. Whether it's subdominant or whether it's dominant, but it does scale the same way. Okay? Because this ratio is always a constant. Fine? The problem is that during the nucleosynthesis time, we know to have the nucleosynthesis, our universe should expand in some typical way so that the nucleosynthesis happens. And that gives a strong constant on the dark energy. Okay, so that around that time, and the nucleosynthesis time, the dark energy should not dominate, or it should not be in such a way that the universe expansion is different from a radiation dominant, and you can actually sort of spoil the nucleosynthesis behavior. Okay, so that actually gives you a bound of omega phi is less than 0.2, which comes from the nucleosynthesis. So if this omega phi has to satisfy the nucleosynthesis bound, so it is always subdominant, because this constant is always constant, it will never dominate the universe. It will never become 0.7, right? If we have an exponential potential. So the exponential potential is a very nice potential. It always scales the background. But the problem here is that you cannot, if it is either dominant, it always remain dominant, the dark energy. If it is subdominant, it always remains subdominant. But to satisfy the nucleosynthesis constant, it has to be subdominant in the early time. So it remains subdominant because this ratio is always a constant. So the exponential potential actually, that's why doesn't work. It's a nice potential. Okay, the structure is there, but it doesn't work actually. So now we just next step, what we do that we start from here, we write what is called the autonomous system, and from there we try to show that what kind of condition. This I show a typical potential, but in general, what kind of condition I can put on the potential so that this kind of tracker model actually can happen. And this may be one form of potential, but there can be other form of potential can give rise to this kind of thing. So we have to get a constant on the potential form so that I can get a tracker kind of thing. So that I do. Okay, so then I will just 3:30 in my long.